In this video, I'm going to go into a little bit more depth about the responsive resize feature and how we're going to make our sites really responsive. So, the last video you saw how it's used overall on an artboard, and generally XD does a pretty good job kind of guessing what different elements are and figuring out how it should resize them. But we do need to do a little bit of manual work to then save ourselves later work down the line. So what I'm going to do for now is just grab our full screen landing page, copy it, and I'm going to paste it way out somewhere in our paste board just to kind of get it out there. And I'm going to work a little section at a time. So one important thing with the resize is that symbols are not resizable. So if you have a symbol within your project, so for instance, here's a symbol, right? I just dragged and dropped this. It's going to not resize properly whenever you actually resize it. So I'd recommend saving an extra copy of your project, and then you can go through and just delete each instance of these symbols. As you right click and delete these, all it does is just remove the symbol link, and now they should resize properly. The other thing that you really need to set up is how these are grouped together matters. So whenever things are grouped, XD looks at that and says, okay, resize all of these elements together and keep them grouped. So for example, this is its own object, and it has this kind of strange bottom section. This is its own object. This is its own object. What we could do is if we wanted all of these to stay together, we could select each one and then right-click Group or Command-G, Control-G on Windows to then group them together. Whenever you group things together, it just helps Adobe XD understand that that is a specific element that you want to try to keep together whenever you eventually resize. I'm going to undo that for now. This is another grouping up here. I actually want to ungroup this because I want these menu items to exist separately from this. So these menu items I'll group together. I'm going to select each one, right-click, group, and then I want to group this text with this button, so I'm going to click both of those. I'm holding down Shift, by the way, and then group. So a lot of this is just finding elements that you can group together. So I'm going to group this symbol, this logo together. And now that those are all grouped, they will resize just a little bit differently. I'm going to go ahead and turn on our responsive resize, and we can just do a quick test. Whereas we move it, yeah, they're moving a little differently. They're actually moving a lot better than they were before. So as I'm responsively resizing this, take note of those pink or purple lines that are being drawn. You notice, for instance, I'll start resizing this side, how there's these little pink lines up by the expert, carefree, or furry, feathery, or scaly friend, then the text underneath it, and the schedule a visit text. What those lines mean, that'll appear whenever we switch to manual mode in just a second, but those lines are basically indicating how these different elements are constrained. Okay? So notice that they're always staying the same distance from that left-hand side, and there's a little line drawing to that left-hand side. Also notice how this little grouping of images does the same thing, but to the right-hand side, and it has that little pink line or purple line drawing to the right-hand side. So whenever we select any element, it has its own responsive resize menu that you can change. So for example, if we want to change these, I can select one, and I click Manual, and then we get this new little menu over here. This menu says if it's highlighted in blue, it's on, and if it's gray, then it's off. So it has a fixed width and a fixed height, which means that as we resize, it's not going to mess with those things. Let's just make sure that that's true. I'm going to select my whole document again, and I will resize it. And as I resize it, even if I make it really small or really big, that text does not change size, right? That text stays the same height and the same width. Let's select one and then turn off that fixed width and that fixed height, and let's see how that changes. I'm now going to go back out, select my whole landing page again. Notice the text now starts to bounce around as it tries to jump around the objects that it's about to encounter. So as you scale it up, it gets bigger, and as you scale it down, it gets smaller. All right, so see how that text is changing. So let's just undo that. undo it again so that it has that fixed width constraint. And remember, we're never actually rescaling these elements now. We're rescaling the whole artboard. So I'm selecting the whole artboard with the responsive resize on and then adjusting it. Okay, looks good. Now, the constraints, I'm going to just go ahead and move this out of the way for now. The constraints, which is this section over here, changes how it's anchored to your document. So right now, whenever I resize this, it's anchored to the left-hand side, and if I select that element, I get this little blue bar right here whenever I'm on manual mode. That's saying anchor it to the left side of the page. It should keep a constant distance from the left side of the page. So if it's here, and I have that on, it's always going to be that distance from the left-hand side. If I move it more towards the middle, grab my page again and start scaling, it's going to still stay in that same position. So it's anchored to that side. I'm going to undo that. Now let's anchor it to the right side instead and see the difference. So I changed it just by clicking it on and off. I anchored it to the right side. Let's select our landing screen. Now you see as I expand, it's no longer anchored to the left-hand side. I can make that closer and further away, and in fact, it'll kind of snap up against it if I don't have that constraint there. All right, I'm going to undo that and go back to how we had it before. The same thing will happen if we make this longer or shorter, which usually doesn't affect us too much in this class because we're mostly just working with websites, which we kind of assume people are going to vertically scroll. But if you are doing it shorter and taller, you're going to need to change this top and bottom constraint. So let's say we have it constrained to the left-hand side, and we turn off both of these fixed, and then we go to resize the whole document. And what's going to happen? It's going to get smaller and smaller as we get smaller and smaller. Okay, so that's just a quick example of how this works. Now notice because these were grouped together, these all moved together, and they can be responsively resized together. So these are anchored to the top and to the right-hand side. It's usually pretty good about guessing where you want your anchors to be. In this case, do I want this one anchored? Yeah, I want it anchored to the left and to the top. That sounds good. I don't really want it any closer to the top than it already is. This Pawtastic and this logo, I don't know if I actually really want these anchored. I might want them to kind of move with the page. We'll work on that a little bit later. This image, if we go to the manual, it's anchored on all these different sides but not the bottom. So whenever we start to resize it, you're going to see that it's going to basically be blowing up and down as we move it. So let's grab the whole page, and as we shrink it down, see how the image moves? So that can be changed if we change that constraint. So how it gets bigger and smaller. So right now, if I get it really big, it kind of moves down. If I get it really small, it stays about the same. So let's change that constraint. I'm going to undo that just a few steps just to make sure we're in the same place we started in. This time I'll unconstrain the top one, and we'll see how that works. So I'll grab it. Now if I start resizing, watch the dog image. It goes together in a more uniform way rather than down. So you can see that this is going to require a lot of work, and you will have to go through and set up your whole document this way. But once you get it set up, it's going to work beautifully. You want to get all these constraints in place to match whatever your needs are, and then whenever you get started, you can really easily just resize the whole thing to whatever the client specifications are without worrying too much about it.